Welcome to the amazing world of automobiles, where we explore the rich and sometimes quirky history of the machine that changed the world. In the century that cars have roamed the earth, some remarkable men have devoted their lives to them. Some have raced them, some have designed them, while others have built them in small numbers or in huge volumes. Join us as we chart the lives of just a few of these giants of the industry, these latter-day gladiators of road and track. Their names have become part of the lexicon of the 20th century, watchwords for the manner in which the motor car has forever altered the world in which we live. There is now almost no one still alive who was born before the motor car was invented, which means that the automobile has been part of living memory for almost everyone. Probably the single most influential man in the very early days of motor cars was an American called Henry Ford. He founded a company that became a vast international corporation and the automotive family dynasty that still controls it. He was born to an Irish immigrant farmer during the American Civil War, the oldest of 5 children. He would outlive all his siblings. In 1896, Ford created the quadricycle. He'd come from the farm, so it's no surprise that his invention looked like a buggy, though it had no shaft for the horses to be harnessed to. The horsepower would come from a gasoline engine that he built himself, tinkering in a shed, while employed by Thomas Edison as chief engineer. That night, history was made. The streets of the world would never be the same again.
Henry Ford's first car was the quadricycle, built round about the turn of the 19th, 20th century. In 1903, he'd moved on from that and he actually set up the Ford Motor Company. He'd previously worked for Cadillac. He'd worked for Edison, so he was getting all sorts of industrial ideas ahead of starting up his own company.
Both Henry Ford and Ransom Olds, builder of the Oldsmobile range of cars, are credited with the invention of the assembly line, although, as is the case with most inventions, the reality of the assembly line's development included many inventors. Oldsmobile was using a production line before Ford, but Ford made it bigger. Ford's first moving assembly line, using conveyor belts after 5 years of development, first began mass production in April 1913. The idea was tried first on sub-assemblies, and shortly after, on the entire chassis. The Model T Ford was introduced on October 1st, 1908. It had the steering wheel on the left, which other car companies soon copied. With Europe under siege in World War II, Ford turned to mass production for the war effort. Specifically, he examined the B-24 Liberator bomber, the most produced Allied bomber in history. Before Ford, 104 a day were built. The 78-year-old Ford showed the world how to produce one B-24 an hour, roughly equal to 600 per month, 24-hour shifts. Ford opened assembly plants in Britain and Canada in 1911 and soon became the biggest car maker in those countries. In 1912, Ford cooperated with Fiat to launch the first Italian assembly plants. The first plants in Germany, Australia, Italy and France were built in the 1920s. By 1929, they became dealerships in 6 continents. That was completed in 1918. Ford's River Rouge factory was the largest in the world. Yet within 20 years, the plant was expanded. Ford himself, then already 75 years old, taking a personal interest. The factory measured 1.5 miles wide by a mile long, with 93 buildings with nearly a square mile of factory floor. With its own docks and River Rouge, 100 miles of railway track, its own electricity plant and ore processing, the factory turned raw materials into running vehicles within this single complex. I am an example of vertical integration of production. During the 1930s, over 100,000 people worked there. Ford handed control of the company to his only son, Edsel, in 1919. Edsel death from cancer at just 49, the ailing Henry Ford decided to resume control. By this time he was inconsistent, suspicious, and not really fit for the job. But for 20 years he retained control of the company without any official title. The directors elected him and served until the end of the war. During this period, the company was losing over $10 million a month. Henry Ford II succeeded his grandfather as president of Ford in September 1905, at the end of his war service with the US Navy. His grandfather, the company's founder, died 18 months later. The younger Henry Ford was at the British Dagenham plant to see the 250,000th car coming off the production line. Ford didn't only build cheap and affordable cars. Ford Sr. never forgot his farming roots. His son Edsel was a partner who built Ford steam tractors from 1915. Within 10 years, he built 500,000 tractors before production was moved across the Atlantic to Dagenham.
But looking back, we can see that the quadricycle, as basic a motorized vehicle as it was truly a significant achievement. It set my great-grandfather on a path to enormous success as an inventor and an industrialist.
100 years after the first Ford, on the road, Henry Ford's great-grandson took a replica on the same journey. Edsel Ford II took the quadricycle for a spin, accompanied by his son, Henry Ford III. Sadly, the original quadricycle didn't survive. Henry sold it for $200 and used the money to buy parts for more vehicles. While Ford may be the best-known name in motoring, the most respected is, without a doubt, Rolls Royce. Founded when the Honourable Charles Rolls was introduced to Frederick Henry Royce in 1904. Over 100 years on, the company remains true to their ambition of excellence and still builds the best cars in the world. Rolls was killed in an aircraft crash in 1910, but Royce would stay with the company until his death in 1933. Royce had only 1 year of schooling and an incomplete apprenticeship, but was a gifted engineer.
People associated refinement with quietness, and the pinnacle of quietness was the Silver Ghost. The Ghost name is the quietness of it, and literally a six-cylinder car, very, very well engineered, and they said that it would have the sense of wafting through the countryside.
Many think that Rolls-Royce follow in technology, but the 1924 model had anti-lock assisted brakes, a feature being celebrated as a technological advance by lesser manufacturers more than 70 years later. In 1911, company chairman Lord Ernest Hives drove the very first Phantom from London to Edinburgh in Scotland, locked in top gear. 66 years later, the same car repeated the feat, having outlived its original driver by 2 generations. At the factory, the cars are called Royces, or perhaps motor cars. They are never, ever called rollers. Royce, whose motto, "Whatever is rightly done, however humble, is noble," had already been awarded an OBE after the First World War and was knighted in June 1930 for his services to British aviation. Rolls-Royce aero engines proved superior in every way and played a key role in winning the Battle of Britain. Thus, he became Sir Henry, but always signed his name simply H. Royce, Mechanic. He insisted on perfection, but nothing that he couldn't do himself. He once filed a hexagonal nut by hand and eye without measuring devices. When it was checked, all 6 faces proved to be identical. The motor cars were built to order, with a huge list of options for customers to consider. Some were built with even wilder choices than the luxurious appointments shown here. Up until the 1960s, it was assumed that the owner would travel in the rear and be driven by a chauffeur. Rolls-Royce ran a chauffeur's school from the very earliest days. In contrast to the luxurious English parlour or gentleman's club feel of the passenger compartment, the driver's cabin was often Spartan and cramped, and a heater was an extra cost option. fleet of Rolls-Royce hearses was built for a Scottish funeral director who declined to pay for a heater at all, pointing out that his passengers weren't likely to notice the difference. Rolls-Royce personnel travel incognito to buy walnut veneer. If it was known where they came from, the price would surely go up. The left and right sides of a Rolls-Royce dashboard are mirror images of each other, made from the same piece of timber. Because many customers order cars with personalised interiors, very often company craftsmen need to fabricate unique parts, such as drinks cabinets. Thus, the woodworkers are a key part of the team which completes the cabin of the car. Walnut is the preferred finish, although customers can specify almost any finish they desire. Rolls-Royce took over the ailing Bentley marque in 1931, and both brands were built side by side for decades, using identical or similar designs, but with Bentley's emphasis on performance as opposed to luxury. The external differences mostly concern the radiator, both brands receiving the same care and attention before leaving the factory. The night before he died, he sat up in bed and drew a sketch on the back of an envelope, which he gave to his nurse and housekeeper, telling her to see that the boys in the factory got it safely. He died before it reached them. Royce had always worked hard and was renowned for never eating proper meals, which resulted in him becoming ill first in 1902 and again in 1911. In 1912, he and his wife of 15 years separated. He had a major operation in London and was given only a few months to live by the doctors. He lived on for more than 20 years and returned to work, but was prevented from visiting the factory, which had moved to larger premises. Engineers and draftsmen had to take drawings to be personally checked by him, a daunting prospect with his well-known perfectionism. According to company legend, a Rolls-Royce does not break down. It is said merely to have failed to proceed. They are never worked on beside the road or towed. They are, if necessary, discreetly loaded into closed vans. Another difference between Rolls-Royce and Bentley. It took Rolls-Royce over a century to build 100,000 cars. Most big car makers build that many every month.
It was really, it became an iconic thing because of the quality of the engineering, the comfort, the suspension, the smoothness of the ride, all those qualities that the very rich look for in their motor cars. And the design of the radiator, the Flying Lady mascot, the R&R symbol became global synonyms for excellence and quality, and of course very British brand as well.
The Spirit of Ecstasy, also called Silver Lady or Flying Lady, honoured a secret passion between Lord Montague of Bewley, pioneer of the automobile movement, editor of the Car magazine, and his secret lover, Eleanor Thornton. Rolls-Royce motor cars turned to Charles Sykes, a young artist, to produce a mascot which would adorn all future Rolls-Royces. It should convey the spirit of Rolls-Royce, speed with science, absence of vibration, a mysterious harnessing of great energy, and a beautiful living organism of superb grace. And thus was born the Spirit of Ecstasy. This is the fourth Rolls-Royce ever built and is literally one of a kind. When it was auctioned, it returned more than 3 times its estimated price.
Well, this car is a motoring icon, a true motoring icon. This is the only oldest Rolls-Royce in the world. It's also probably the smallest Rolls-Royce in the world.
The sale broke the world record for the most expensive Rolls-Royce sold at auction and most expensive veteran car, vehicles that were made before 1905. It's the only Rolls-Royce old enough to take part in the prestigious London to Brighton veteran car run. Although the car was one of the first Rolls-Royces ever built, it still had several modern conveniences, including cruise control.
Well, this motor car is quite different from the modern car, a lot more controls on it, and one of the most important things you have to do is to make sure the oil gets to the right place at the right time. And in front of the driver there's 4 little sight jars, and you have to watch the oil dripping, 6 drips to the minute, through these, and that feeds the engine, keeps the engine running smoothly. Controls on here, you have a spark control, which advances and retards the spark for you, and you have a hand throttle, a bit like cruise control on a modern car, really.
Just as Ford, Morris and Agnelli defined the car industries in America, Britain and Italy, so it was Louis Renault who made motoring accessible to his fellow Frenchmen. In the grounds of the family estate was a shed where Louis messed about with engines. The fourth of 5 children born into a wealthy Paris family, Renault built his first car in 1898, a modified Didion-Bouton tricycle fitted with a 4th wheel, a revolutionary jointed driveshaft and a 3-speed gearbox with reverse, which he patented a year later. Until then, cars were huge and expensive, but Renault's design made motoring accessible to the middle class. On Christmas Eve, 1898, he won a bet with friends that his invention was capable of driving up the slope of Le Puy Street in Montmartre. As well as winning the bet, Renault received 13 firm orders for copies of the vehicle. Seeing the commercial potential in his ingenuity, his 2 older brothers, Marcel and Fernand, who had business experience from working in their father's textiles firm, joined him. They formed the Renault Brothers Company, and business and administration was handled entirely by the elder brothers, with Louis designing and manufacturing. However, Marcel was killed in the Paris-Madrid motor race of 1903, and when Fernand retired for health reasons in 1908, Louis took control of the company. Gradually, the factory took over the entire suburb where once stood houses. Louis Renault had some strange quirks. He mistrusted banks, and he wouldn't have women or red-haired men in his factory, and 2 hats lasted him his whole life. His one love was his factory, and he was there night and day, and expected everyone else to do the same. He'd come early in the morning to see the foundries tapped. He'd hurry back from the opera at midnight to check the castings, and at any hour he'd stride up and down the assembly line, tightening nuts and fixing parts. He was compulsive, he had to do everything, and he drove his workers as hard as he drove himself.
C'était un très grand meneur d'hommes.
A great ruler of men.
Il menait ses cadres comme il menait ses ouvriers.
He looked after his executives just as he did his
C'était
workers.
un chef d'entreprise qui, avant toute chose, avant même l'intérêt humain, voyait exactement la grandeur de la maison qu'il avait créée.
A businessman who was more interested in his business than in his workers.
L'homme, pour lui, représentait réellement un matricule,
For him, a man was just a number,
une pièce nécessaire dans le cadre de son entreprise,
a necessary part in his business.
mais qu'il rejetait volontiers si cette pièce présentait quelques difficultés, si elle n'était pas bonne, si elle vieillissait.
But he was perfectly happy to throw this part out if he wasn't satisfactory, if he grew old.
Nous ne pourrions pas dire que M. Louis Renault était un monsieur social.
One couldn't say that Renault was a social man.
If Renault made his fortune in the First World War, he lost it in the Second. After an Allied air raid bombed his plant in March 1942, Louis developed aphasia and could neither speak nor write. After France was liberated, he was arrested on charges of collaboration with Nazi Germany. He died a month later and claimed to have been mistreated in prison. A traumatic brain injury was observed, but no inquiry was made. 3 months later, Renault was nationalised on the very thin charge of collaboration. His dying words were, "the factory." In 1949, the director of the factory during the war obtained a judgment that he and the plant had not collaborated. And in 1967, Louis' son Jean-Louis Renault obtained indemnity. Louis, however, was never officially exonerated. Renault's defence was to have been his desire to stop his factory and his workers from being exported to Germany. But even without its obsessive founder, Renault flourished under state control, making cars for a war-ravaged but gradually more prosperous Europe. One such was the R8, an entirely new 4 to 5-seat family car. Using a 1-litre engine in the back of the car, the R8 had a top cruising speed of 80 miles an hour. One of the first cars intended to be sold all around the world, the R8 also had disc brakes, childproof locks and rudimentary anti-theft and safety equipment. The R8 was launched in 1962, and the R10, a more upmarket version of the 8, was launched in 65. Both ceased production and sales in France in 1971, but were produced in Bulgaria and continued to be produced in Spain until 1976. In Romania, the 8 was produced under license between 1968 and 71 as the Dacia 1100. Renault's numerous patents changed the automotive industry. Chief among his designs were hydraulic shock absorbers, the drum brake and the turbocharger. His hydraulic shock absorber is still a common feature on automobiles today, and turbos are becoming ever more common. Renault's other inventions included a transmission that transmitted power and motion from the engine to the wheels through a series of gears without the use of chains or belts. Although Louis Renault was often plain rude, he was a man of honour. After mourning for his brother Marcel, who died racing a Renault, Louis set about establishing control of the company. Marcel had willed everything he owned, including his share of the company, to his mistress, Suzanne d'Aveny. Fearing that she might marry and have children, Louis bought out her share of the company, but paid Suzanne off handsomely, with an annual payment and a brand new car every year until her death in 1953. Just as Ford and Renault had built and sold cars for the masses, so did William Morris. Born into humble surrounds in the same year as Renault and 15 years after Ford, his family soon moved to Oxford, and after leaving school at the age of 15, Morris was apprenticed to a local bicycle repairer. 9 months later, he set up a business repairing bicycles from the family home. Getting together every penny he could, and with hard work, William Morris became an established Mr. Fix-It, who repaired anything that came his way, including some steam-powered cars of wealthy Oxford University students. The business being a success, he opened a shop and began manufacturing bicycles. In 1901, he began to work with motorcycles, and in 1902 acquired a garage and sold, repaired and hired cars. In 1912, he designed a car, the bullnose Morris, and began manufacturing at a disused school in Oxford. The outbreak of World War I saw the new car maker almost founder, as the young men who might normally buy cars were dying in the trenches of Europe. Morris saw out the war making munitions, and the company just barely survived. With peace came prosperity, and in 1919 car production restarted, rising from 400 cars to 56,000 in 1925. During this period, Morris built or purchased factories at Abingdon, Birmingham and Swindon to add to the one in Oxford. His aim was to rid Britain of American Fords. Although Morris was happy to learn from the Americans, he pioneered the introduction of Henry Ford's mass production methods. In the 1920s, Morris cut prices and sales climbed. A year later, he looked at costs and cut his sales prices again. With a reputation for high quality and a policy of cutting prices, Morris continued to grow, and in 1924 overtook Ford to become the UK's biggest car manufacturer with 51% share of the home market. By the time the Depression was over, 81 British car manufacturers had gone out of business, and Morris had bought up some of them. Morris was made a baronet in 1929, created Baron Nuffield in 1934, and made a Viscount in 1938. All these titles became extinct upon his death without an heir. In 1938, Nuffield purchased the bankrupt Riley and Autovia companies and quickly sold them to his own Morris Motor Company, and with Wolseley, it became the Nuffield organisation. This merged with Austin in 1952 to become the British Motor Corporation, and in 1968, nearly every British car maker merged to become British Leyland. In 1924, the head of the Morris sales agency in Oxford, Cecil Kimber, started building sporting versions of Morris cars called MG, after the agency, Morris Garages. Specially built MGs were raced, rallied and used to set records all over the world. Edsel Ford bought the first MG motor car imported to the United States. His father, incidentally, owned a Rolls Royce. Morris brought out new ranges of medium and big cars, pioneered credit, hire purchase and fleet user schemes. They streamlined their dealers' sales and after-sales service schemes and made a determined bid for repeat business when cars reached the end of their useful lives. In 1933, Sir William Morris appointed Leonard Lord, a brilliant production engineer, to take charge of the factories. He spent a fortune installing the latest technological advances. Moving assembly lines were the new big thing. Everywhere, economies in production and increased output were sought. By keeping control of his factories, by putting everything he made back into the business, by thrift and good judgment, Sir William had become more than a millionaire. The man who hated extravagance and ostentation became one of the richest men in the world. The British government didn't trust such wealth in the hands of one man, so they brought a case against him for a super tax. But one thing was certain: more and more cars were on the roads, and William Morris was probably responsible for getting Britons moving, or stopping them, as massive traffic jams clogged the country's small, narrow and winding roads. Morris and his biggest rival, Austin, were the giants of the British car industry between the two world wars. Morris foresaw the coming danger. He knew how unprepared Britain was for another war. In the summer of 1938, he agreed to build, equip and manage a huge new factory to manufacture Spitfire fighter aircraft. As the conflict unfolded, car production was replaced by weapons of war, and the Austin and Morris factories were bombed repeatedly. Once the war was over, car production resumed, despite shortages and rationing, with much of the output exported. Morris married Elizabeth Anstey in April 1904. They had no children, so he gave most of his fortune to charity. The Nuffield Foundation received £10 million for education and social welfare.
Now, Lord Nuffield, I've been asked to present you with this Golden Heart Award, which I do with the very greatest pleasure, on behalf both of the Variety Club and of all the people who have benefited from your benefactions.
The once crowned Morris name has gradually slipped into obscurity, last used on the Morris Marina, with production ending in the summer of 1984. In a cruel twist, the last Morris of all was an Austin van. Working for Morris was Turkish-born Greek designer Alec Isigonis. In the 1950s, the car world was looking for the next big thing, and it was Isigonis who provided a small thing instead, the Mini. With a tiny wheel at each corner and a small engine driving the front wheels, the Mini quickly became Britain's people's car, and there were many variations built with once famous badges like Wolseley and Riley, and vehicles using many of the same components and designs, such as the Morris Minor. Isigonis was British by accident. His grandfather had worked on a railway line in what is now Turkey and was granted citizenship. The family were evacuated to Malta in 1922, and Alec and his mother moved to the UK in 23. Alec studied engineering in London. He failed his mathematics exams 3 times and subsequently called pure mathematics the enemy of every creative genius. He built and raced several radically altered cars and was recruited first by Austin, then Morris, before moving to Alvis and back to Morris over about 20 years, before designing the best-selling British car of all time, the Mini. Carlo Abarth was born in Austria, but much of his life was spent in Italy, where he pursued his passion for racing, car design, and his canny business skills. By 1950, these combined to create Abarth & Co., a tuning company with a world-class reputation and competition pedigree. At the age of 30, he emigrated to Italy, where he became an Italian citizen, changing his first name from the German-sounding Karl to the more Italian Carlo. The Arbath & Co. tuning company was created in Bologna. Arbath modified various Italian cars, altering their appearance and performance. By 1954, Arbath employed 90 people and had become a household tuning name in Italy. While racing was his passion, the money came from exhaust systems and performance manifolds. What really launched the Arbath legend were the road race Fiat 600 derivatives. Carlo built 6 Fiat 600 saloons for the Turin Motor Show, with Arbath's 750 engine, which quickly earned a performance reputation in Italy. Arbath more than doubled the car's standard output. Italians flocked to Arbath for an affordable road and race car. Actually, demand was too high for a small company, but instead of increasing the number of staff already producing exhausts, Carlo offered the 600 conversion as a kit. The conversion was expensive, more so when prices for the extra radiator and brakes were added. But it was a lot cheaper for the average Italian to purchase the kit and do the work themselves. The cars built in Arbath's workshop also benefited from details like strengthened front leaf springs, larger rear springs, front disc brakes and hinges that allowed the engine lid to sit open. It was thought that the open bonnet lid was for extra cooling. In fact, it improved the car's aerodynamics. Arbath & Co. also tried out the sports car markets with a range of larger engine cars, exploiting the company's ability to generate small batches of different sorts of car. By the end of the 60s, Arbath found itself in a more competitive marketplace, and profitability was declining. So in 1971, Carlo sold Arbath to Fiat. The car giant embargoed further work on the race cars, preferring Arbath to focus on rallying. This was the cue for several ex-employees on the racing side to begin their own businesses, for example, Osella. Arbath also prepared Fiat Group's rally cars. In the 1980s, the Arbath name was mainly used to mark performance Fiat. The name was almost forgotten in the 1990s, and in the 2000s it was used like a trim level on Fiat cars. In 2007, Fiat relaunched the Arbath brand with the Punto and the new 500. Arbath himself returned to Vienna, where he died in 1979.
There's a lot of designing, testing, and trial runs behind every new innovation or new performance record. How do I know? My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
Carroll Shelby has had an impressive impact on automotive racing and design over the last 50 years.
Stock Cobras beat just about everything in sight to win the U.S. Road Racing Championship in 1963. In 1964, we took our first crack at the World Road Racing Championship with a new coupe body of our own design and a race-proved Ford engine. We took our new Ford-powered Cobra across the pond. And for the first time in a long time, Europe saw American race cars winning. A lot of work goes into preparing the cars for each separate race. Each circuit's a little different. Daytona, for instance, has bank turns and Sebring's as flat as a pancake. So we set up the cars a little differently. By the middle of the afternoon, the pace is just too hot for some and the field begins to thin out. And now the durability of our engines and components pay off. And we're running 1, 2, 3, 4. Twilight, night, and round they go. And still the GTs and Cobras hold up. Finally, one more lap, and then it's all over. And the big board places the overall winner, and yours truly is back in the winner's circle, along with Ford and 2 great drivers.
There's a lot of stories about that. Some people say it was a dream, that I woke up and wrote the name down at night. To tell you the truth, I don't know where it came from, because I've always said A car makes a name doesn't make a car. You can have the best name in the world if the car's not any good, that nobody's ever going to remember it.
Shelby was on hand to put the muscle into American muscle cars, and he wasn't shy about advertising the fact either.
Man, Carroll Shelby, engineer, race driver. The car, the Shelby Mustang GT.
To build my kind of car, I had to take an existing car and modify it. I could have chosen any set of wheels I wanted. I picked Mustang. Mustang is styled right, lean and strong looking, not fat and round. And Mustang has that long list of features and options. I'll tell you, when it comes to imitations, I've seen some, but competition for the original, I haven't seen any. Only Mustang makes it happen. These aren't just words, it's a fact.
So I said, guys, put a budget together. We came up with a budget of $15,000. The bean counters got into it, gave us $1,500. That's where the first GT350 came from. It cost $1,500 to put the first one together.
This is the reason that Carroll returned to Ford, the new Ford GT, a modernized road-going replica of the race-winning car from the 1960s, the GT40. Having retired from driving in October 1959 for health reasons, he opened a high-performance driving school and the Shelby American Company. In the shop, he designed and built the famed Cobra cars. Shelby went on to help design some of the most successful and beautiful cars of the era: the GT40, the Mustang-based Shelby GT350 and Shelby GT500, and of course the 427 Shelby Cobra. Parting from Ford, Shelby moved on to help develop performance cars with divisions of the two other big three American companies, Dodge and Oldsmobile. The most memorable of these was the Dodge Viper, but he returned to Ford for the GT. Just like the good old days of 40 and more years ago, Shelby remains willing to extol the virtues of his own creation.
Enough power, handles well. I'm having the time of my life. I'm glad to be a part of it.
John Cooper was a co-founder with his father Charles of the Cooper Car Company. He became a car racing legend with his rear-engine chassis design that changed the face of the sport at its highest levels, from Formula One to the Indianapolis 500. Charles Cooper ran a small garage that specialized in maintaining racing cars. John left school at age 15 to become an apprentice toolmaker and served in the Royal Air Force as an instrument maker during World War II. After the war, he and his father built simple, inexpensive, single-seat racers for privateers, often from surplus military hardware. The Formula 500 cars were extremely successful and quickly in high demand, and in 1948 they founded the company to build more of them. In typical British fashion, Cooper always downplayed the story about how they decided to put the engine in the back of their racing cars, insisting it was just more convenient. Because the cars were powered by a motorcycle engine, they put the engine in the back, driving a chain. Initially, John raced his own cars on a regular basis, but as the company grew, he found less time available to compete. In the early 1950s, it seemed as if every aspiring young British racing driver began behind the wheel of a Cooper, and Cooper's Formula One cars were driven by the legendary drivers of the time. Here's Mike Hawthorne, Britain's first Formula One world champion, driving a Cooper Bristol. The change to rear-engine cars came literally from the bottom up, from the tiny 500s to Formula One. Jack Brabham, Sterling Moss, Maurice Trintignant and Bruce McLaren all drove Coopers. In a 9-year period, the team took 16 Grand Prix wins as Brabham and the team won back-to-back world championships in 1959 and 60. The Mark I Cooper Jaguar and subsequent models took part in sports car and endurance races across Europe, but the most successful was the little 1100 Coventry Climax engined car. This was the machine that moved Cooper from small-time operators into the big league. Cooper was the last surviving Formula One team principal from the formative years of the sport, and he often lamented later in life that the fun had long since gone out of racing. He helped establish Britain's domination of motorsport technology, which continues today, and he received the CBE for his services to British motorsport. He remained head of the family garage business until his death at 77 in 2000. Cooper's development of the Mini Cooper was adored by both rally racers and ordinary road drivers. They were raced and rallied, and instead of building all the cars themselves, Cooper developed the parts to make the cars quicker and licensed the name to the Mini builders. As a result, nearly 100,000 Mini Coopers were sold, and almost half as many again of the faster Cooper S model. Before John Cooper's death, the Cooper name was licensed to BMW for the higher performance versions of the cars, inspired by the original Mini. Stirling Moss is probably the best driver never to win a Formula One world title. Born in 1929, Moss was among the first professional drivers who earned a sizable income. He had a manager who made sure he had a steady flow of paying engagements. Staying physically fit, he travelled the world to race and demanded appearance money. His grandfather changed the family's name from Moses to Moss to avoid anti-Semitism. His father, a dentist, finished 11th in the Indy 500 in 1924, and his mother competed in trials and rallies.
Because I was brought up with fast cars, not racing cars, although I had seen a racing car at Brooklands. My father took me to Brooklands when I was a kid. But I've been brought up with quick cars. I mean, my father had 2.3 Alfa, I think it was. And I enjoyed being with them, not driving them, because I hadn't driven them. And so I didn't meet with much help from my family until later on, once I got into it. Then my father was an enormous help. He backed me right to the hilt, helped me in every way he could, helped me strip the engine down when it was a Jap and grind the valves in and do all those things. So it went really from very negative and against it, because I suppose he thought it was a whim. You know, as a kid you say, well, I want to be whatever. And once he realised that I was interested and really meant it and dedicated to it, then he fell in right behind me, as in fact did my mother.
When Stirling ordered a racing car from a newspaper ad, his furious father cancelled the order, but later relented. In 1950, Stirling hit a tree, breaking his kneecap and 4 front teeth. Luckily, his dentist father was able to repair the damage. In 1951, Moss was contracted to Ferrari, but was dumped by the Italian team before the season even began. It was a snub the Englishman never forgot, and for several years he only drove British cars, which probably hurt his prospects. His 1954 efforts were enough to convince Mercedes to sign him up as number 2 driver alongside the great Juan Manuel Fangio. Moss won his first Grand Prix in Britain and finished the year second to Fangio. But his most famous victory wasn't in Formula One at all. It was in the Mille Miglia. The 1955 Mille Miglia is considered one of the greatest races of all time. At 7:22 a.m., Moss and Dennis Jenkinson roared away from the start. Jenkinson, a former world champion sidecar passenger, created a roll of road notes, the forerunner of today's rally pace notes. 10 hours, 7 minutes and 48 seconds later, they crossed the finishing line at an average of almost 100 miles an hour. Moss raced at Le Mans in sports cars too. Drivers in those days were versatile and raced every weekend if they could. In June 1960, Stirling was injured in a crash in Belgium where a wheel came off at 140 miles an hour. Despite breaking his back and legs, he returned to the car just 4 weeks later. Another crash at Goodwood in 1962 ended his career when Stirling was 33. It took 45 minutes to cut him free. He was unconscious for a month and was paralysed for 6. Back at Goodwood a year later, he tested a car for half an hour. When he stopped, he said simply, "I am retiring." He had to think about things he used to do automatically and was no longer competitive. In one race or another, he'd beaten every man who had held the World Championship over a 10-year period. Long after retiring, Moss revealed he used amphetamines, then quite legal, to concentrate for long periods during races. He made a cameo appearance in the 1967 James Bond film Casino Royale as Peter Sellers' chauffeur. Sir Sterling has been married 3 times. He has a daughter, Alison, by his second wife, and a son, Elliot, with his third and current wife, Susie, who is 23 years his junior. They've been married for 30 years. To people everywhere, the name Fangio conjures up an impression. One of only 2 drivers to have won 5 Formula One World Drivers' Championships, Juan Manuel Fangio won nearly half the races he entered and set the benchmark for almost half a century. Fangio was born in Belcache, Argentina in 1911, the son of Italian immigrants, and he only ever spoke Italian and Spanish. Juan Manuel was named in honor of St. John, the Spanish king. He went to school at the age of 6, but at 11 he went to work in a metal shop. At 13 he got a job at a Studebaker garage that also prepared racing cars. His influence wasn't just on the track though. He proved to be an icon for generations of aspirant racing drivers who followed him. Here is Brazilian world champion Emerson Fittipaldi.
My career was very much influenced by Fangio. He gave me a lot of motivation, I tried to follow his style of driving. I mean, he had a very precise styling, very consistent every lap, every corner doing the same. And, I remember I was very emotional when I met him the first time I was about 10 years old.
Fangio's name will always be linked with Mercedes, for whom he drove through much of his career, although he also raced and won in Maseratis, Alfa Romeos and Ferraris. In 1991, Mercedes threw a lavish party for his 80th birthday. In the background, a young Michael Schumacher. The German would eventually surpass the maestro's record of 5 Formula One World Championships, the only driver to have done so. After impressive results against visiting Europeans in post-war races in Argentina, Fangio was funded by the Peron government and went to Europe to further his career. In 1950, he battled for the new Formula One world title with his Alfa Romeo teammate Giuseppe Farina, but the Italian took the title. However, in 1951, Fangio won 2 of the first 3 races and the final race in Spain, and his first world title. He was involved in a frightening crash at Monza in 1952, breaking his neck. He didn't win a race again until late in '53, once again driving a Maserati. 54 saw Fangio become probably the only driver to win a world championship driving for 2 different marques in the same year. He won the first 2 races of the season in a Maserati before switching to Mercedes, who were returning to Grand Prix racing for the first time since the Second World War. He went on to win 3 more titles, for Mercedes in '55, Ferrari in '56 and Maserati in '57. Fangio took his 5th and finest title at the ripe old age of 46. His record of 24 wins out of 51 Grand Prix starts will probably never be broken. Fangio once said that only Jim Clark and Ayrton Senna matched him, except that he outlived both of them. Briefly kidnapped in Havana by Cuban rebels in early 1958, Fangio decided to retire that year. He died in 1995, aged 84, and was given a state funeral, but his status of motorsport's greatest gentleman will live forever.